How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk, and guess who I got with me? People we should already be familiar with, but we're at the Correctional USA conference, and I got lucky to bring these individuals with me to the conference. They're people I've befriended on Facebook for many years, fellow experts in the correctional field, and thanks to Corrections USA, we're able to bring them down, do a conference together, discuss growing concerns, what's trending. So as you guys know me, I'm Anthony Gangi, the host of Tier Talk. Got about 15 years in corrections, and just an advocate for the field, and pretty much good generalized knowledge to help hopefully address the concerns that we have in 2018. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mr. Gary York.
Hello, I'm Gary York, author of Corruption Behind Bars and Inside the Inner Circle. I have almost 29 years experience in corrections. I worked for the Florida Department of Corrections for many years, and I left there retiring as a prison inspector for the Florida Department of Corrections, and I now have been with the Polk County Sheriff's Office of Florida for the past 12 years, and I'm really glad to have this opportunity to be here with these folks, and I hope I can live up to everyone's expectations.
Hi, I'm Sonia York, 22 years Florida Department of Corrections. I have worked in many fields, covered many areas in the department, 12 going on 13 years for the Sheriff's Department, 34 years, and lots of experience I can share with everyone.
I think, I'll be honest with you, first off, 34 years. Thank you for the service.
No, thank you.
Russ?
I'm Russ Hamilton. I have 27 years experience with California Department of Corrections, and most recently just a little more over a year and a half now with a small juvenile facility in Central/Northern California. And I'm just here to be an advocate for corrections and trying to solve problems and just do what I can to help people out.
I'm Keith Hellwig. I'm the author of two books. One is No Place Like Home, and a follow-up book called Morning Will Come. I'm also a retired captain from the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. I retired from corrections after 36 years. I continue to work today as a police officer for two small departments. I feel it's important for myself and the other members of this panel to strive to raise the professionalism of our chosen career and to show people that we are indeed professionals.
I'm Dr. Kim Bost. I started in corrections in about 1996, so have a bit of time in. I'm clinical director of Arch Service Agency and also an adjunct professor. Often teach psychology courses and forensic psychology. Teach that a lot, forensic psych and abnormal psych.
Oh, I gotta add, just for ethical reasons, me and Kim know each other because we are executive board members of the New Jersey American Correctional Association.
Yes.
So she understands why we have to add that. And I'm sure you're an inspector, so I'm sure you understand.
Well, and we're married, so just so everybody out there knows.
And I've never met Russ before, but just sitting there, I feel a special fondness.
So we got a lot to discuss, so hopefully the people that are hungry can bear with us for a few minutes. But so first off, guys, I really love this conference because it really highlighted unity that I would love to see leave from here, go back to the facilities, and really make some good change from the frontline perspective. But I also believe that we don't have the unity in our immediate facilities. And I think that if we're going to start anywhere, we have to start within the immediate facilities that we work at, try to build a connection between custody and civilian staff, custody and management, or just staff in general and management, and see where that can get us first. Because right now, even if we're fighting for change, it seems to be that the change we're fighting for is inconsistent because nobody seems to know what we want. So I guess in this case it's a little bit informal, so whoever wants just to chime in, just chime in. So you want
I wanted to say something. Yeah. I really like what you had to say because I know when I started working at Cook County Jail, I wasn't a CO. I was actually working for mental health services. But it was very clear that, you know, one of the things that everyone said is we all work together. Regardless of whether someone is a civilian or you're a CO, we all work together so that we can all go home safely in the manner in which we arrived. I think something that was also very important, though, that I haven't seen necessarily across the various places I've worked is the understanding that civilians need to be trained to understand that you are a visitor in a blue house. And I think that has a lot to do with some of the issues that you can see.
Can you say that again?
Civilians, You are a visitor in a blue house.
And for those that don't understand that terminology,
I was gonna explain. Basically, what that means is everything that happens in the correctional facility is secondary to safety and security. If it was always my experience that okay, I'm psych, I have a certain job to do. If I tell an officer, hey, so and so, I have to come in and see this inmate, that inmate. Okay, doc, no problem. We just need to do X, Y, and Z. You let me know when I can come in. Or I would say, this is what I need to do today. Can you guys just make sure it gets done? They're like, cool, we just need to do X, Y, and Z. Not a problem. Or sometimes what I've had happen to me in the past is, doc, you can't come over here right now. Okay. And I leave. I think it was a good enough working experience where they respected me enough to let me do my job, but I respected them enough to not question their job, understanding that they knew what I had to do. They were going to let me do it, but safety and security overrides everything. So I think when there's a mutual respect, there shouldn't be any problems. I think a lot of problems come in when there isn't any mutual respect.
Well, let me ask you a question.
I'd like to leapfrog off that.
Well, yeah, I want you to. I want you to continue with that. I was going to ask you. Part of that is, I'm sure you're going to get to it. Is why do you feel there isn't that mutual respect between parties?
I feel that lately the trend has been towards rehabilitation, and I understand the need for rehabilitation, but in a lot of situations that seems to take precedence over security in facilities. And to me, that's just not right.
I agree.
The prisons exist to protect the public. The prisons exist to protect inmates. When you put security secondary, you're putting the lives of staff and inmates at risk.
Absolutely.
I know I've worked in institutions when I was a captain, and if I had to cancel a program, it almost took an act of God. And when I did cancel it, I had to justify why I canceled that program. Well, if I canceled the program, it was probably because there was a security risk somewhere along the line. There was a reason we couldn't do it. And unless I had a good reason for it, I really had to explain every which way to sundown why that program was canceled. Now, I understand the need for programs. I understand the need for rehabilitative efforts, things of that nature. That's also part of our function and our task in prisons. But as Dr. Bost said, first and foremost, in any correctional setting, should be security.
Right, if I can continue on what you guys are saying, I want to ask Russ something, and kind of to complement what they're saying. I agree with, I'm going to call her Kim, but she has earned the title of doctor, but forgive me, we have a very good relationship. She doesn't call me Mr. Gangi. I think that right now we're starting to see some change where people are starting to realize that there has to be a balance between rehabilitation and safety and security, because rehabilitation is going to fail ultimately if safety and security is not paramount. It has to trump. I hate Trump. I hate that word. Actually, I should say it has to be paramount. Sorry, guys, this is what it is. It has to be paramount over rehabilitation, because the environment itself has to be conducive to that. So we're not. Unfortunately, what's happening now is it took too long for us to realize that it's a blending of two. We don't work in isolation of each other. At one point it was purely punishment. Later on it became purely rehabilitation. It was never either one. It was always both together, working together for the ultimate goal. Now, I got to ask you, Russ, why do you feel that it's taken us this long to start to realize that it is a balance of both? It is a balance of rehabilitation. Ultimately, we know but it's a balance between rehabilitation and safety and security. Why is it taking so long for people to realize that that's what it is?
I think that some of that has to fall back on the custody aspect, we being custody. I think that there's sometimes where we've failed to come forward in our communication in order to train the medical staff, the psych staff, to let them know what we're thinking, why we're thinking it, and to bring them up to speed on some of the issues they may not understand about things like security threat groups, about contraband entering our yards, and about just the general threats that we can face, just based on general inmate malaise. If they're not having a good day, we could see a riot, any of those things. And because they're not steeped in that particular culture like we are. Sometimes they don't see it, they don't understand it, and they may not always appreciate the fact of, you know, why we can't get those inmates there, or why we're not able to let them in at that moment, or any of the other things that we deal with.
Let me say a word to you, and you tell me how this word relates to what you just said. Communication.
Well, you know, communication should be Corrections 101. And that should be something that we should be thinking about every day. We should be thinking about how I as a supervisor train my staff, how I as a supervisor can help train non-custody staff. But aside from that, sometimes what happens is with all these other competing elements, like medical or AA, NA, those things, that's Corrections 301 or 401 or 501, and sometimes what happens is when we forget about that communication, we get an inverted pyramid, and our foundation erodes from that, and you can't build anything off of that. You can't build rehabilitation, you can't build a safe program, and you can't keep them stocked with the inmates to do the things that they need to do. And so we need to go back to that. And custody staff, it's incumbent upon them, because we're the only ones that are true experts in that particular part of the field, that can show them and tell them and make them understand. And once they understand it, I've never had any problems when I've approached them and say, hey, here's what we need to do. Can I come and give you a class on inmate manipulation? Can I come and give you a class on contraband and how these inmates might be trying to, you know, sneak stuff out of here, out of your area? You know, once I explain those things to them, I've always had, you know, great interactions, and even had them, you know, actually help me, you know, interdict contraband and all sorts of things.
Well, I like the fact, first of all, you're emphasizing teamwork, which we know is needed. Guys, if we could connect on the institution, the power of our voice would be amazing, because you're looking at people that are connected to, you know, the rehabilitation. I mean, guys, if we could partner with rehabilitation, they could really understand what we do. They could go on the forefront for us, because they're going to show you, hey, guys, I know you want this, and I know you want that, but it has to get filtered through custody, through safety and security. And I want to piggyback real quick on something that Kim had mentioned. I agree with 100%, but because of the audience, I'll be a little less aggressive, but I agree with the aggressive approach of it's a blue house. And the reason why I agree with that is also complements what you said. We're kind of like the experts, and we know you got to get this done. This is how we're going to make it work, because ultimately you are the facilitators. And I think that the more that you guys are able to work together, the more management can easily have a facility that's more fluid, because we're facilitators. We're not departmental experts. So we're looking for things to work well on the ground floor, to connect, you know, have the pieces connect for us, so I'm not forced to make a catch-22 decision because two departments aren't getting along with each other. And that's when we get to Sonia and Gary here. So now, just kind of feeding off of these comments here, in partnership also with Keith, who is on the same page as with the bringing up the balance of rehabilitation and safety and security. I got to mention here, man, with the teamwork that he's mentioned, with the communication, that's going to help management a lot in regards to making decisions that are beneficial for the collective mission of the agency. But if that teamwork doesn't exist, if that partnership doesn't exist, if the communication isn't there, management, who really aren't departmental experts, we do expect our department experts to, you know, the leaders to give us what we need. When those two departments don't get along, we're making decisions that really aren't beneficial for the agency as a whole. So how do you think the teamwork aspect, the communication, how can that help management make better decisions?
Well, let Sonia start, because actually in her job, she has to move and make sure inmates get to their programs on time and visitation and certain things. And she has to deal every day with working with everyone to get them to their programs. So
yeah, and like you were saying, security comes first. You know, if something out of the ordinary happens, you have to cancel that program, whether it's visitation, AA, like you were saying. And the public sometimes doesn't understand that. You know, you can explain it 10 times in different ways, and they don't understand. And you know, security comes first.
Well, Gary, to compliment on that, what can we do to make them understand?
Well,
because she's right 100%.
Here's what happens now. From being a correctional officer before a prison inspector, what I see in that area is we have to use, if you have it available, our roll calls and our briefings. And if you don't have it available, then managers, you need to get up out of your seat and go talk to your officers and say, folks, we have to cooperate with everyone. We have to cooperate with medical. We have to cooperate with getting inmates to their programs on time. to their educational programs, to their AA programs on time. We must work like a clock together. If you know at 3 o'clock or whatever time inmates must be in this program, let's don't wait till 5 minutes till and then move them down there and they miss 20 minutes of their program. We have to work together. Another thing from the prison inspector side that I picked up on is not working together with medical, with educational programs, or any type of program for inmates. If we all don't work together, we end up with consequences sometimes. Maybe a small incident will occur. And then we have to come in and investigate an incident, not criminal, but maybe administrative, maybe misconduct. And one of the answers is when you ask a civilian staff member, why didn't you do this or that? Well, I don't know. I haven't been trained on that. Nobody told me. Well, there's your communication and training. We must train not only our uniform staff, we have to have the proper training for civilian staff in the prison system for everything to work. And then we have to put us together and make us work together.
And I want to kind of, piggyback on what you said. I think it's also important for everybody to understand what each other does.
Right.
Because if I'm psych, you need to understand that, psych services now across, in most states, it's mandated that inmates receive psych and medical services. It's a legal mandate most times. So when, folks ask, why are they getting it? Because they're entitled to. Now, you may not believe in it, and that's okay. But it's really about, what are we supposed to give them? And do you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing?
Right.
That does not excuse a violation of safety and security.
Right.
I have a function, you have a function. When you tell me it's safe for me to do my function, then you're supposed to allow me to do my function. I complete my function, or if you tell me you need to stop because we have a problem that's arisen, I need to fall back because
That's going to fall right into that.
it's about safety and security, and if everything's going to flow evenly, we have to work cooperatively. And I think when you get down to the local level, that's part of the problem. People aren't working cooperatively with within departments.
And that's where your staff shortage comes in.
That too.
If you are pulling the weight of 2 or 3 posts, everybody needs to pull it together,
right,
to get these inmates to those programs, because we know that that's going to be a continued problem.
And if we know we have a staff shortage, perhaps you have to wait. You realize that it may take an extra 5-10 minutes,
right,
and you have to be sensitive to that because there's a staff shortage, and you've got one person doing the job of 2 or 3 people. So give them that consideration.
Getting back to what Gary said there a second ago, if civilian staff don't know better, whose fault is that? That's our fault.
House of Blue.
We have to be open, and we have a tendency sometimes, being the authoritarian figures that we are, and stepping up to the plate and doing the things that we do, and operating in the environment we're in. Sometimes we can end up negligent because we're used to telling an inmate and it not being questioned, regardless. We should be thinking better and understanding that we're not communicating with inmates. We're connecting, and we should be communicating with our fellow co-workers and our peers to get those things across that they need to know, the things that they need to understand.
Because we work as co-workers, not civilian, officer, janitor. If we're co-workers, everybody's going home safely.
So far we've been talking about the need for programming to understand security needs, but I think it's just as important for security to understand programming needs.
Yeah.
I know there have been situations where we've ordered a lockdown at the institution I was at. We had people at the institution who are on kidney dialysis. So we had to arrange to get those people down there. Well, the man who was my boss at that time said, no, we're on lockdown. Nobody goes anywhere. These people are going to die. They need dialysis. I tried to explain that to him, and it was like talking to a brick wall. I did what had to be done. I got the people down there for dialysis. I got the people down there that needed to get insulin, things like that. But that was a failure on the part of security to realize the needs of the inmates, whether it was medical needs. There were people who had to see the psychiatrist that day. It was their day to see the psychiatrist, to adjust their medications, whatever. The psychiatrist doesn't come in every day, maybe once a week, twice a week, whatever. He had to see these people. Well, there were certain people in security who just didn't understand the necessity for that. So I think it's real important to have a cross-disciplinary approach to our training. We need to know what programming is doing. We need to know what clinical, what medical is doing. They need to know what security is doing. And I think it behooves all of us, in order to maintain the security of the institution, to know what other departments are doing.
And believe it or not, and again, I'm kind of saying this in an optimistic fashion, because unfortunately, I don't know if everybody's going to agree with me on this, but I also think that cross-perspective training may improve the relationship between frontline and management, because management has to look at the bigger picture, and that bigger picture involves how the departments work with each other, how they connect with each other, and ultimately how they solve the mission. So if we sit there with a myopic view of my department is supreme and everything's got to go my way, it really makes it complicated for management to really find an easy resolution to any problem, because no one's thinking of the bigger picture of teamwork. They're more thinking about what's best for my department, and that's a big problem with management. And I think that could relate to what exactly Keith just said, is they don't know how the roles interact with each other. Like I have an idea of what psych does, but I really don't understand what they do, and therefore I really don't understand how your role interacts with my role. And I think that if we understood that there's always going to be a dependency on each other, then that starts bringing about that teamwork. And my other concern right now with this, and I'll bring this over to Kim, because we're going to kind of cross into a lot of topics here, but this can lead a little bit into manipulation, is that if we're divided, we're weak, we're vulnerable. Inmates, it takes some time to create a target, but we're giving them the target.
Yeah.
We're putting the target on our back is huge, and we're doing it to ourselves. So the importance of teamwork, obviously, the importance of us getting along, but you don't think from a manipulative inmate's perspective, they don't want custody and civilian getting
Absolutely
along?
not. Absolutely not.
They thrive on divisiveness.
They do thrive on divisiveness. If you've got all these people from different facets of the prison working collectively together, what are you getting over? How are you getting over? That was when, working at Cook County Jail was such a great experience, because that's what it was. I go back to, and I say it all the time, and I think because I've had other experiences where that wasn't the case, and I yearned for it. If we're all working as co-workers, regardless of title and regardless of education or pay, because that's also something that I think has divided people. Officers thinking that psych or medical is making so much money, so they're angry because maybe they haven't gotten a raise, or they haven't received their steps, or however raises are given. Then they find out that psych's not making as much money as you thought, and it's like, oh, okay. But if we're working as a team anyway, how is an inmate going to be able to say to me, oh, well, they don't let us, and they will do this and they will do that? I work with that person. I know exactly what they're doing. So no, you're not playing that game. And actually, I'm going to let my coworker know what you said, if it's not something that's said to me confidentially. But I'm definitely going to make sure my coworker knows, what, we got to make sure that there's no gaps with this particular inmate or those particular inmates. I don't have to disclose what the inmate said to me to make sure that I have a good working relationship with my coworkers. It's about checking with them to make sure, are we on the same page? Do we understand what the mission is? I have to do something as psych, you have to do something as classification, you have to do something as, social services or education, but do we understand what the mission is?
Right. And the inmates need to see that working partnership.
Absolutely.
They need to see that when we're lost or confused, because there's going to be time when we don't have the answers, that we go to staff. I used to hate lazy supervisors that would tell a rookie cop, if you have any questions, go to the inmate. He's been on the unit for a while. It's like, really? First off, you just insulted staff that he can go to, and second thing is, why would you tell him that? Our number one thing is not to trust an inmate. Oh, but you just told me that inmate's a trustee. We're always have these conflicts, but one of the key things is that we don't want. It's crazy. We don't want to put the target on our backs ourselves. And the funny thing about manipulation is that it's not so much Listen, I'm not minimizing or negating what somebody has done. If you have a dirty cop and that's their intention from the get-go, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the officer that may slowly fall for something that unfortunately was just a game that was subtle and slow, covert, and they may not have realized the game was being played until it's too late, and now it's more about the fear of getting caught, just the leverage that's created. And I think that right now, everybody looks at the outcome. This officer was manipulated, what an idiot, but you're not looking at the process. The process could have been 6 months ago. I got a great story where I had a sergeant yell at me in a unit, embarrassed me in front of my peers, right, other officers, but also embarrassed me in front of the inmate population. And when everybody else left, I felt the need to redeem myself. Who did I want to redeem myself to? To the damn inmates, because they saw that I was embarrassed. So now, hypothetically, this gives the inmates a chance for divide and conquer.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Hey, I see you got a problem with the sergeant here, so you know what we're going to do? We got your back, blah, blah. Next thing you know, let's say I got caught up 6 months, shame on me, but no one's going to look back 6 months ago to see that. They're going to look back at like what happened at that moment. The game started, and another concern is based on the situation. I always say that we want to make sure that we always remember our prescribed role, remember that you're dealing with inmates, that label is very important, it's the initial shield, but also don't let inmates isolate you. That's the key. Now, we can manage that if we're surrounded by our peers, but Keith, as a manager, you know, you were a supervisor, you were on the administrative end, sometimes you got staff that work in isolated parts of the facility that are maybe on the other side of the facility, constantly surrounded by inmates, barely ever frequented by staff. What do we need to do to make sure that that person, even though they're at an isolated post, we don't leave that person vulnerable?
You know, when I first started in corrections, I was 22 years old. I was fresh out of school, and I got assigned to a housing unit. It was a medium security institution. There were 36 inmates in the unit, and me. The institution itself was, from the control center to the furthest unit, was a mile. There were 12 housing units, all separate housing units. There were times where I would go literally for a week without seeing another staff member. And I would be with those inmates constantly. Now, when you're 22 years old and you're supervising inmates that are anywhere between 20 and 60, and those are the people that you're interacting with, you really have to be on your guard, really not to get close to them, not to talk to them, the whole works. It's almost as if they become your peers. You know, we would have patrol officers that would stop in occasionally, or we'd have the food delivery officers stop in, supervisor would stop in, things of that nature. But otherwise, you're pretty much on your own. And I know there were a lot of officers who did end up getting in trouble because they got too close to the inmates.
So would you expect more tours from supervisors or support staff?
Most definitely, most definitely. That's one of the things when I left that institution and went to another institution as a sergeant, and I promoted as a lieutenant back to that institution. I was there for a little over a year, and I promoted to captain. Well, when I was shift commander, I made it a point with my lieutenant that during the course of our shift, we visited every unit during the course of that shift. He would take half the units, I would take the other half of the units, and we would visit with them. We would stop in, we'd see how the officers were doing. And we weren't doing it to check up on them or anything else. We were doing it just to let them know that we were there if they needed support, we were there if they needed any questions answered. Well, it became a habit to do that, and it was a good habit. Some people, I remember one guy, he said, you know, I've got 35 years in. He said, you know, what if I was one of these guys that didn't like the supervisor coming around every day? And I said, well, then I guess you'd be screwed because I'm coming around every day.
Well, you know what keeps speaking, you know, continuing on that and the need for us to kind of always interact with our staff. We don't want to leave them isolated. I mean, that's the key. I mean, that's the number one thing, believe it or not, when manipulation is going to happen. Is they got to isolate staff. They got to be that support for staff. So it's great to have management realize that and protect them, because as I said, I mean, we're also responsible to protect our officers, you know, our staff members, and if we fail to do so, you know, part of that is also on us. Part of that is also on us, because at the end of the day, if someone brings in something that they're not supposed to bring in, we got to ask, well, what led up to that point? It's not just all about the individual who brought this stuff in. Literally, we have to learn from these mistakes. We have to see what happened, and again, not to I say the same words again, not to negate or minimize the responsibility of the individual who committed to it, but sometimes to give responsibility back to the inmate, maybe we look at the officers or the staff members temporarily as victims, so if we see them as victims for a moment, we could see that there was a game being played, and there is a sense of responsibility that we give back to the inmate, because the funny thing is, there's no loss for an inmate who manipulates staff. You gotta understand that. It's the staff that winds up getting in trouble, and the inmate's scot-free. So that's our fault. That's our fault for not putting responsibility or anything on the player. You know, the person that chose to play the game. And again, just want to continue with manipulation, because it was one of the things that were asked for on the post I did. When it comes to, we talked about the isolation. You know, we talked about taking people out of prescribed roles. Did you know that Washington tried to push a law to not call inmates? Yeah, to call them whatever it is. If they're a patient, they're a patient. If they're a student, they're a student. Very liberal move. Again, I don't play left or right, so it is what it is. You're from a liberal state. It is what it is. This happened in Washington. In your opinion, and it's not to degrade anybody, how important is it for us to remember at all times that that's an inmate?
If I could answer this, it goes back to the start of my career again. I don't mean to butt in. When I started, they were not inmates. They were residents. We were not correctional officers, we were correctional counselors. They even went so far as to remove the uniforms from officers in maximum security. They wore a blue shirt, blue slacks, and a maroon blazer that had a little department badge on it. Well, that went over like a turd in a punch bowl. It lasted about 2 years, and suddenly they realized that inmates,
It doesn't work.
more or less respected the uniform.
Yes.
So they went back to the police style uniform. We became officers. We were no longer correctional counselors. They were no longer residents. They were inmates. But, you know, it's like rabbit hunting. You know, if you know where the rabbit hole is, the rabbit's not there. You wait for it, it's going to come right back around. It's the same way in corrections. That rabbit's going right back around that hole, and we're coming back to the residents and correctional.
But that's why we're trying to do this, and I agree, and it's good that we're kind of, it's cool because we're bringing everything full circle here. So, and you know, to comment a little bit of what Keith was saying here, does that label of inmate provide a little bit of a shield or a little bit of a protection for the staff members that deal with the inmate?
Well, you know, people tend to deal in their minds, you know, symbolically and with symbols and everything else. That's one of the reasons, you know, you wear a badge on your chest, you wear a uniform and stuff. Those things put you in a mindset to where you're fulfilling a specific function, and that's a function to which society and your job has assigned you. When you're taken out of that, and you don't really have that clearly set in your mind as to what your function is, then you're much more open for manipulation. And that you know, that manipulation runs, just backtracking a little bit to what you were saying, is that, you know, when we say manipulation, we always think all the time about the worst case scenario where you've got a dirty inmate. But what about just where they've manipulated to the point where there's just no openness, no communication. I'm not an approachable supervisor. I'm not an approachable officer. Whereas some of these, you know, the people involved in psych or other programs and stuff, if they don't feel they can approach me, maybe they won't be telling me about some things that they see the inmates doing. And it's as simple a shield as that. It might be something we may not catch that might involve, you know, weapons, contraband, another staff member being manipulated. Don't I want her to be able to come to me and say, hey, you know, that inmate's been spending a lot of time around such and such. Maybe that needs to be looked into. And so
conversely, if an inmate, if you know, you see something that a civilian's doing, you want to be able to say to them, you may want to consider, you know, what's going on.
Yeah.
I understand that you have a job to do, but what I'm seeing is.
Yeah, sometimes manipulation, it's not all the way dirty. It's just it just impedes your efficacy in doing your job.
Well, don't forget, I mean, sometimes those that are being targeted could just be the inmate wants to have fun because they're looking to kill time.
Exactly.
But most of the time there is an end game, and we always have to be worried about what that end game is. And I do say that we have to be responsible for each other, because again, not all people are going to realize they're being played. And here's the funny thing, and Gary, as a former investigator or inspector, I'm sure you're going to be able to realize this. A lot of times we look at manipulation, we look at the individual who's being manipulated, and we tend to ignore the situation. It's the situations that we are going to learn a lot from. the situation of the individual that gave the inmate the opportunity to advance in their game. So, as an investigator, and you get someone, or inspector, I apologize, and you get, an officer that's been caught up in a game, how important is it for you to understand the context of how this occurred, and then how do we make sure that we're able to educate others just in case those similar situations happen again?
Well, I've done many cases where it's the simple manipulation of the inmate manipulating the officer who has been overheard talking to another officer that Christmas is coming, I can't pay my house payment, and I'm not going to be able to get gifts for my children. And I've actually had this told to me, and not only by the inmate telling me how he learned of the officer's situation, but the officer admitting to me that that was a situation. And the inmate used that and approached the officer and said, I'd really like just a simple pack of cigarettes, and you get for $100, I've got somebody that'll give you $100 on the outside for it. And the officer, no excuse, crime is crime, a pack of cigarettes in Florida and even a sandwich to an inmate from the outside is under 944.47, the Florida statute, is actually a felony. Now, you won't get many state attorneys to prosecute for food or cigarettes anymore these days. It's got to be drugs. But administratively, you can lose your job. So the officer needs money, and he's been manipulated to bring in a pack of cigarettes. And then it builds and builds because now the inmate, of course, as we know, has them on
leverage.
And we learn through many investigations how things happen. Women that I've investigated that were having a relationship with an inmate. Again, no excuse, no reason to do that, but we want to know why you did it. And I would always ask at the end of investigation, I just would like to know, why did you fall for this inmate? Many different answers, but one of the most famous answers I got was, my husband's verbally abusive. My husband tells me I'm ugly. My husband treats me like dirt at home, and I come here to the prison and the inmate tells me how pretty I am. He gives me these nice little cards that he drew up and hands it to me. He makes me a flower out of a piece of paper, and I fell for it. Not trying to be mean, that's no excuse. You're wearing the badge and the uniform. You don't cross the line. But these are some of the reasons. But it does give us something to use later for training.
Well, that's what I was asking. I know, Sonia, you have 34 years in, correct? Okay, so Sonia, I'm positive in your career you've seen a lot of people go down, correct?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I would say some you knew, all right, this one doesn't shock me, and some could have shocked you. What is how come there's some that okay, this one's, I got this one, and others it's like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. Is it because maybe there's a situational factor that was involved that we were not aware of?
Well, I'll use one as an example. I won't mention any names. This particular female officer hated inmates. I mean, literally, I hate these inmates. Look at that. They're call them every name in the book. They're scumbags, they're this, they're that. Next thing we know, she's on a hospital. The inmate goes to the hospital and she on the hospital post, to a hospital. She ends up watching the inmate. Next thing we know, they're having a relationship, and that was a shocker right there.
Because of the way she carries the
Because of the way, right.
Okay, so I got a two-part question.
And we were really shocked because she literally hated inmates, so that was a really shocker.
I actually want to feed off that. I was hoping that we'd get somewhere like that. It's always, I'm usually shocked. That's happened in my career where someone you wouldn't expect because of their demeanor.
Right.
And then my thinking, maybe that was actually a defense, I don't know. So I have a two-part question for you. I want you to maybe explain that to us from a psychological perspective. The person that, I guess, shocked Sonia was someone that just didn't come off as inmate friendly, right? So I want to see, but there's another, I got one more question though also, is there, I know the end result is always going to be the same thing. An inmate wants something, they're going to go for it. Usually the requests are consistent and small, but ultimately there's an end result. But is there a difference in approach from a male inmate trying to manipulate a female staff member, or a female inmate trying to manipulate a male staff member? So I wonder if we could just touch on Sonia's thing with the staff member that you just wouldn't expect because of how they treated inmates. Next thing you know, they get caught up. Is there?
Well, I wonder, it harkens back to Shakespeare. Me don't think the lady protests too much. I hate inmates. I hate inmates. I hate inmates. Oh, who are you dating?
Well,
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
No, really, it's like, you know, you
Cover
don't
up.
have to, it almost seems,
Right.
and it's a bad cover-up.
Yeah.
Well,
You
see,
know.
and there's this other part too. When you're dealing with inmates, no matter if it's a female or a male inmate, you have to draw that shield. If they come in and they say, "Oh, you look so pretty today," or "Oh, this," you know, you have to nip it in the bud. Don't leave any doors open. Nip it in the bud right there. You don't address me that way. You don't talk to me that way. You know, you nip it in the bud, and that you
set the line.
You set the line. You build that shield, and you know, I'm here to do my job, and you let me do my job, and you know, and that's how it's gonna
Right.
and it works.
And once you set that line, then there's definitive, this is your prescribed role. And that goes back real quick to the label aspect, where if I remember you're an inmate, I also know what my role is.
Right.
So we're not connecting on anything outside of that, and personal information getting exploited can help an inmate find the common ground. I love kids, I know he loves kids. Hey, guess what? You know, we're going to work that. Now going back to the second half, that was actually pretty funny with the... Going back in the second half, is there a difference in approach between a male inmate, female officer, and vice versa, female officer, male inmate?
I think the male-female dynamics just come into play. You know, how men move, how women move, and how men are receptive to, you know, what men are receptive to and what females are receptive to. I'm totally not surprised by what Gary said. You know, when, you know, a lot of what you've heard when women get caught up is, this person paid attention to me. This person, you know, this person was nice to me.
Joyce Mitchell.
You know,
Right. Yep.
you know, this person was really nice to me. And how long? And it probably was going on for a good long time, because you build very slowly. And after a while, you know, when something feels good, you don't want to give it up.
Kim, I want to ask you a question, just so we're on the same topic. Do they fall in love with the inmate?
Ask them. I mean, I think sometimes they do, but again, dynamics, the way women operate and the way men operate, you know, it's very different dynamics. You know, that's why, you know, women are so emotional and they get attached very easily. I think we just have different ways of operating, you know. In terms of, you know, when you said, you know, the way male inmates operate versus the way female inmates operate.
In regards to the approach to the opposite sex to manipulate.
But I think it's just different approaches of how, you know, how do you get a woman, how do you get a man? I mean, but when you think about female inmates, most people hate working with female inmates. Why? Because they're so blatant. You know, they're just so blatant, and men are really taken aback by their aggressiveness. And I think, you know, I'm not sure, but I wonder if the men who get caught up with having sex with these females, what's going on? You know, is this a challenge that you're trying to overcome? You know, you met this female and it's like, oh, now I've got a challenge. Let me see if I can bust this woman down. So now you wind up having a sexual relationship with her. But usually what you see with women who get, you know, women officers or female staff persons who get caught up with male inmates, usually they're wooed.
Right.
Which is not usually what happens with men. Men usually aren't wooed. The female staff people are wooed.
I think that goes back to the isolation aspect again, though, too. If you look at Joyce Mitchell, she worked with those inmates. You know, I brought this up before.
In a complacent manner from custody, they put no pressure on her, so she had carte freedom.
I've mentioned this before. I was called upon to investigate a former captain's wife who was supposed to be having an affair with an inmate. We did our investigation. We found no grounds for it. The inmate was released. A month later, she quit, divorced her husband, and moved in with the inmate. Well, the thing is, though, she was a captain's wife. She knew, I'm not going to write him letters. I'm not going to make phone calls. We work together in the kitchen. Nobody can hear us talk. We don't have any cameras. She knew enough not to leave a trail. She knew just what not to do to get
Just
caught.
real quick, the isolation part. I had a case in Central Florida. Colonel's wife worked at the same prison. She was a dental assistant, and she ended up having a relationship with the inmate in the dental clinic, and her husband's not very far down a couple of halls in his office. And it's isolated from everyone back in that dental clinic. So I agree.
Yeah, and when you hear about it, you're just shocked. You think, how the heck could they do that?
Let me, I want to get back to you, Keith, because I want to feed off something that actually you guys have been saying, but I want to go back, it's going to go to Gary real quick. When someone does get caught up, and now we start to investigate them. And then obviously there's a process where we may have to bring other people in that may have witnessed maybe some type of interaction. Have you ever had a staff member tell you, this doesn't surprise me, and then you're responsible if it doesn't surprise you, why don't you do something?
Right. I've heard that quite often. I'm glad you brought that up, because I'll interview someone who maybe supervised them or maybe was an officer that we know from the assignment sheet that has worked with this officer in the same dorm. So you bring them in and you say, you ask them, have they observed any unusual behavior? And they'll sometimes actually say, yes, I have. You know, she just seemed awful, extra friendly with the inmate, and so I'm not surprised. And my question to them is, well, why didn't you report that to a supervisor? Why didn't you go to her and say, what are you doing with this inmate? You know, we're here to do our counts, we're here to do our security, there's our officer station. Why are you down there by his cell all the time, you know? And they go, well, I just didn't think it was my place. See, there's an issue we have, whether they knew it or didn't know it, that's the excuse you get. And is there a training issue there? Is ethics training missing maybe? Are managers missing from the scene, not going down there enough? Some of these things that you hope when the warden finally gets the final investigation, as if you would hope you have a warden in that seat that says, okay, I see a problem here. The inspector did his job and found out everything I need to know, but I can't go back and hold the warden by the hand and say, come on, management, this is what you got to do. Get your people trained.
Right, and you need that, and actually it's good to go above and beyond understanding why the person was caught up, because as you said, you got to hold the warden or somebody some form of corrective action so it doesn't keep on happening. And even if it's bringing everybody back to training and undue familiarity. And I want to go to Russ real quick. When it comes to manipulation in your years of experience, what advice would you give to someone that's, hey, listen, before you work with inmates, these are the things you need to know so you could at least put somewhat of a shield to protect yourself from being manipulated? So what would be some advice you would give to, let's say, rookie officers, civilian staff, whatever, someone new to enter in corrections?
I think the single most important, the single most effective thing that you can do is to give these individuals concrete examples about how people were manipulated in the past. You show them the breakdown of how the inmate manipulated a specific individual to get a specific effect done, and that's what you really just want to concentrate on, showing them how that occurred, and then you just move from that into each area where it's possible for them to be manipulated.
And I love that, because you're outlining the incident before the outcome, because that's what it was. Everybody just sees the outcome and you're not learning anything from that. So I like what you're saying. Here's concrete examples. And if I may, if I may, Keith, funny thing is, that was one of the things that we used to do at roll call and lineup, or what's it called, shift briefing?
We call it briefing in Florida.
Yeah, so
I think it's pardon me. I think it's important to have a briefing or a roll call, whatever, muster. The institution I was at, we used to have a muster, and it wasn't even a formal muster. The supervisors, we did our check-in in the muster room. That's where the staff came in, and they'd sit and they'd have coffee before they went on shift, things of that nature. You learned a lot about your staff. You were able to convey information to them about what was going on in the institution. You were able to listen to them interact with each other. You were able to see if something was a little bit out of the ordinary. Unfortunately, we got a new security director who decided he didn't want the supervisors associating with staff that way, so it created a barrier. So we lost that interaction. I think it's an important interaction. I think anytime a supervisor can interact with the people that work with them, it builds up a relationship with them. They get to know the people. They know what's going on, and people will trust them more because they see them more.
And to piggyback off of that, if you trust someone, if something's going on, if you have a question, you don't mind actually telling them, you know what, I think there may be something up. Or you see them and you can notice they're moving differently. Something's going on. Let me just ask this person before it becomes this big situation. You see them frequently, you can see that there's something going on. So we can ask, and it's informal, so it's not as if it's a write-up and people are worried about losing their jobs, which is going to, create other problems. things are done informally, and it's unfortunate that across the country, that's really, that whole meeting has now just disappeared.
Yeah, and it was good for employee morale too, because you could kind of recognize people on a greater scale. Bring them in, you did something good, and let the staff see the recognition. It increases employee morale. Now, unfortunately, we are going to be zip-lining. I shouldn't say unfortunately, we don't want to do it. But unfortunately, we got to come down to the end of this video. But I promise you, we don't leave people hanging. So there was some concerns that we were going to elaborate on, but unfortunately, we went so deep into what we were discussing here that we just don't have the time to do that. So one thing was understaffing. Gary did a great video yesterday with Keith Hellwig on understaffing. It's up on his YouTube channel, Gary York, Corruption Behind Bars. If you guys haven't subscribed, come on guys, subscribe. The channel is for us to learn. I mean, guys, sometimes I know people don't want to take work home, but we have to learn about our field so we can be better at it, and sometimes that requires us just taking maybe 5-10 minutes out of the day. These aren't long videos, except for the one we're doing now, but that's because I made it long. And I also have a video on understaffing. I believe it complements the work that Gary and Keith did yesterday. Feel free to check it out. We try to complement each other, so we try to give a really good roundabout perspective. I also wanted to get the cell searches. I didn't get a chance to elaborate on that, but there's a great article by Russ Hamilton. It's up on his Facebook page. I shared it onto my page. And it talks about searches, contraband, weapons, stuff like that. Great article, very well written. I think it would be great. And also, I can't explain why. I do have a video on cell searching. Gary has a video on cell searching. We're going to go in deep on why it's foolish to have inmates watching officers do their searches. We'll express that next time. I'll tell you why in regards to the information that's being provided when an officer does a search, as well as the psychological stress an officer's going to have when the inmate is watching them do a search. So a lot of good material. I have the YouTube channel as well. Subscribe, interact, engage. But I would like to give you guys each a chance to maybe say some final comments to the audience. I'll start to the right and then work my way.
I think the one thing that I often say to officers, the thing that I think is most important, please take care of yourselves. Officers tend to have a very short life expectancy past retirement. Corrections is unlike anything else in the world. Street cops get to roam around. Corrections officers don't. It's really difficult, and it's so important to take care of yourselves. Inmates also kill themselves. Corrections officers also kill themselves more than inmates, and there's no reason for that. Please take care of yourselves and take care of each other, because that's the only way that we're going to make it.
The thing I'd like to say is to keep learning. I was in the business for 36 years, and I was learning something up until the very last day. You're never going to know everything. You're never going to be expected to know everything, but know as much as you can, learn as much as you can.
Well, you just stole everything I was going to say. No, on the real here, it's been an honor and a privilege to meet everyone here. We all knew each other before this, but only online, and I think this is just going to be a great venue to be able to get some things out there that people need training and information on, and I feel privileged.
Thank you.
As we all are.
Likewise.
Guys, that humbles me.
Thank you.
It really does. Sonia?
Thank you for including me in this panel here.
Thank you for 34 years of service.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It's a long time.
And my message is you'll gain more respect from the inmate population if you're fair and consistent. You'll get more respect out of that. And always work as a team. Teamwork goes a long way, keeps everybody safe. Thank you.
And my message is, please, as we said in the military, keep your head on a swivel. Always be alert. Don't have tunnel vision when you're working. Always have your peripheral vision going. You never know what's going to happen. You have to stay safe, and you have to get home to your family every night. Thank you for listening to us, and God bless.
And just some final shout outs. I got two authors on the panel here. Gary's got 2 books on the market called Corruption Behind Bars, Inside the Inner Circle. Great book, great reading material. You learn a lot from his books, obviously. I mean, they talk about the investigation process, but also talks about the people that you think are untouchable, and that should encourage you if you feel that someone's doing something wrong. It doesn't matter how high up they are. They can get taken down. That book's a reminder of that. You also have Keith, who wrote 2 books, and also, before I get into his book, he is one of the admins for a very big Facebook page called the Correctional Officer Brotherhood, with over 47,000 members strong. And right now, his head is he's thinking about ways to now take those 47,000 members and what can we do to kind of get that collective voice and that momentum going. 47,000 strong is no joke. That means that we know that we have people interested, but how do we keep that interest? His 2 books that he has in the market is first book, great book, was my mind's going back. Yes, what is it?
No Place Like
Yeah, sorry guys. No Place Like Home and When Morning Comes.
No Morning Will Come.
Oh, sorry guys, hold on. And I read both the books. No Place Like Home and Morning Will Come. These books are great because they truly do define our everyday routine, but also adds the element of danger, because as we're going through the routine, there's something brewing in the background, and it really does show a balance, a really good balance of what it's like to be in corrections. Because when I picked it up and read it, I was like, this is so true. And then you got people coming in like, it's the truth. And I think these are both set of books would be great to incorporate in some form of training for people coming into the field, just to give them a taste of what it's like to be in corrections. As for myself, thank you guys for always listening. I had a really good time out here in Vegas at the Corrections USA conference. I want to thank them for inviting us and giving me a chance to have a panel to talk about the trends that are going on. The only thing I would like to leave, I know we got to go, is guys, when we go to these conferences, we learn a lot, but we got to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What we learn? Are we taking it back to the facilities? Or are we just leaving it here? And unity. We're united here. We're not united at our facilities. So I think it's time that maybe we go to a civilian staff member. If you're a civilian staff member, go to custody. Thank each other for the role they do. And like Russ said, let's learn from each other, see how we can make things better. And I'm telling you guys, and I'll end on this, if we all connect as one, we will be unstoppable. And on that note, Tier Talk out. Love you guys. Stay safe.